we're going to have a little discussion about something we do that we're really proud of and that we think is going to make a huge difference for myeloma patients throughout the world. On one, and hopefully it will lead to a cure. So let me first introduce Nathan. You know, Nathan, I don't know your title. What is your title?
It's whatever you want it to be. My official title is Manager of Clinical Research.
One of the things you should understand that's different about the HealthTree Foundation and how serious we are, thanks to Jenny, is to my knowledge, we're about one of the very, very few types of disease organizations who have PhDs on staff to run research projects and supervise everything. And that's what Nathan is. Nathan's, so I baffle him and he dazzles them with brilliance. And he's a really brilliant, brilliant guy. And I wanted you to get to know what he does because I think it's really, really important for you to know what we do behind the scenes and how hopefully this will make a great difference in your lives. So Nathan, I just like to start out with, what do you do? What do you see as the most important things you do? What are what's your mission?
So I think to explain that, I want to provide just a little bit of background, super brief. So I was diagnosed with cancer when I was 16 months. So just a tiny, tiny baby. I had acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Fortunately, I was around the time when VAMP, the chemotherapy, just started really being used, and I underwent radiation chemotherapy up until I was about 8 years old, and then I was pronounced cure, and I've been cure ever since. But I've always had this vendetta against cancer, and I've always wanted to be in the trenches with research and to fight against cancer in any regard. So it doesn't have to be specific to leukemia. I've done breast cancer, I've done colorectal cancer, I've done liver cancer, and now I'm here working on multiple myeloma. And so my goal is to find cure for multiple myeloma, for all cancers. And when I finished my graduate work at the University of Arizona, I did a postdoc at the Huntsman Cancer Institute. A postdoc, just in case you're not familiar, is just more work at cheap labor. So I did that for a year at the Huntsman. And when I got towards the end of that, I was looking for my next step. Where did I want to go? Did I want to stay in academia? And so I started putting feelers out there, and serendipitously, I came in contact with HealthTree, and I loved what they were doing. I loved that there was an enormous support group, and I knew that my mom, when I was younger, needed something like that, and it didn't exist. So when I heard that, I was excited, and then the idea of having this opportunity for patients to consolidate the information, and then asking permission that we could then query it and ask some profound questions that weren't being asked, was just, I felt like it was next level. This is where research needed to go. We were going at a pretty solid speed, but it was a little bit too slow. And so it needs to go a little faster. And I think HealthTree is that vehicle to take us a little bit faster, and our destination is a cure.
Explain how, if a patient gets a HealthTree, starts a HealthTree Cure Hub profile, how do you use that data for research? And also, how do you keep it anonymous? Because a lot of people are afraid that their medical information will get out. And we have I guess a fail-safe in that in HealthTree. If you could please explain that.
Yeah, so, I think for all clinicians and investigators, it's our sacred duty to just keep the privacy of patients. And so, first of all, we ask for permission that we can use your data. If you say no, we accept that. It's not incorporated in our research, not incorporated in our analyses or anything, and you still get the benefits of HealthTree. But if you do allow us to utilize your data in our analyses, you get assigned a number. And so we don't know any identifiable names, addresses, anything that can connect you to the data is removed. And so you get some number, and that's still, I mean, I don't want to downgrade that it's not important. It's very important to us. So it's once we have that data, it's kind of like if you think of Amazon or Netflix, where they'll give you a recommendation based on your history. And we want to be able to do that for healthcare. And so we can offer recommendations for patients, recommendations that they can then, of course, take to their doctors. We're by no means replacing Jens. We'll never be able to replace the Jens or Dr. Hillengas, sorry. And okay. So but we want to offer these recommendations based on this accumulation of health data. And so essentially, if you share your data, if you have a particular mutation, let's say it's some translocation or deletion, we can identify other patients that have a similar genetics as you. And maybe this person has gone ahead, maybe they're 15, 20 years down the line. We can then look at what worked for them and propose that to you. And hopefully you can have that same journey or the same path and same success as they did. Now, since the field is always evolving, maybe they kind of had some side effects are a little bit too severe, or they wouldn't recommend that you go through. Well, fortunately, there's a new drug that could be used as an alternative, and you could still achieve the same outcome with fewer side effects. I don't know if I answered the whole question.
Oh, that's one of the, and I'll ask this question to Dr. Hillengas. One of the issues that we are trying to get across to people is the value. First of all, defining what real world evidence and data is, what the value of it is, and why this is a very, very different time to be using it. I mean, we didn't have real world data 30 years ago, really, at this level. So could you explain, what real world data is, why it is important, and how the HealthTree Cure Hub profile fits into that? Now, this is for Jens.
Oh, that's for me?
Yes.
Okay. So I have to know an answer to that. Okay, no, it's a completely different approach. When we do clinical trials, as we promoted earlier, we have a clearly selected group of patients. We have so-called inclusion criteria. We say this age range, this stage of disease, this number of prior treatments, and so on and so on and so on, right? So we have a very strict, limited number. But as I said several times today, myeloma is so different in different patients, very heterogeneous. And there's a huge number of patients who do not fit this specific question. Real world is taking everyone who agrees to it and then look at their data. There's no pre-selection. A little bit, of course, if we want to know what's going on in myeloma, we don't ask an MDAS patient, but we have much more access to the much wider field. And initially, oftentimes, real world data was frowned upon because it's kind of messy. You sometimes have missing data. There's the hemoglobin from 1984 is not there. And in a clinical trial, that would never happen because it has to be there. Otherwise, you get penalized as an investigator and so on. So these are two completely different approaches. And they're both very valuable because the real world data is what is actually happening, right? We can have our ivory tower approach with the clinical trials, and we need that. But then we have unfortunately, life is messy, right? And cancer is messy. So we can, and then we need big numbers because, as I said, it's very diverse. And as Nathan said, another patient, only if we look in tens of thousands of patients, we will find another patient who is similar to you. If we look in 10 patients, all 10 will be different. To have a chance to find 2 similar patients in 10 patients is almost impossible. And I have to be careful. I think Kirsten Moisich is already in the room. She's the expert on that topic, so I don't want to lean out too much, but we need these large numbers, and a clinical trial can only have such limited numbers because they're very specific, and then we try to extrapolate based on that data, and for that we need the real world data.
This is for both of you. What kind of questions can real world data answer that clinical trials can't or don't?
Many. It's a very challenging
I know
question. Yeah, yeah.
but give us like one or two examples. Like, what's a type of study that might happen that would never happen under the old regime?
I think what we just discussed in the break is rare situations. Like, for example, what we discussed is non-secretory myeloma. I have a patient who is struggling with that because she cannot get into a clinical trial because clinical trials usually exclude patients with non-secretory myeloma, but they are out there. They are rare. It's rare that it happens, but it can happen. And with the real world, if you have 10,000 patients and don't care if they are 55 or 75, then you can look at 2 patients who fulfill this criterion. But to make a study for those 10 patients or 20 patients, that's almost impossible because no one will pay for it, because they say, I will not invest millions of dollars for 10 patients. I invest millions of dollars for 1,000 patients. Right. And that's one example for rare situations. If you have a large data set, then there's a much higher chance to find these rare situations and get information out of that.
So some of the research that we've done with investigators that I think is like a really good fit or really good place for HealthTree to excel is we worked with Dr. Michael Thompson. He's at Aurora Health Center in Milwaukee. And he wanted to know if patients were getting revaccinated after treatment. It is a standard of care or standard practice to revaccinate after treatment, specifically after a stem cell transplant. And so we proposed that question. And we don't want to know just a specific location. We want to know nationwide. We want to get a very large sample size or very broad sample size. And the vaccinations that we're interested in were flu, pneumonia, shingles, and then a broad spectrum antibiotic. And he found that, or actually the kind of the interesting thing is in just a matter of months, we had over 500 patients participate, which is wonderful. And so that's you guys. You guys are participating and helping answer these questions. And so what he found was that for flu and pneumonia, patients were getting revaccinated, but for shingles, patients weren't, or fewer patients were getting. So there was a high representation for flu and pneumonia, but a low representation in shingles and the broad spectrum antibiotic. And so that was interesting. That was informative. So we could take that finding and then address the field and say, we're doing a great job in this area. We could probably pick it up a little bit in this area. And that's one thing that that is a secret power of HealthTree is we can reduce the time it does to do a clinical trial or to ask these questions. So I'm going to use Dr. Hillengast as an example, but he conducted a study in Germany. I think over 3 years, you got roughly about 600 patients to participate in a study. And then he came over here and he did the same study through HealthTree. And in about 3 months, we got about 600 patients to participate. And so he was able to double his efforts or double the number of patients that participated in a fraction of the time. And so that's one of the superpowers is that we can accelerate this research because we can quickly reach out to the patients, offer this opportunity for them to participate. And the wonderful thing is that all of you are excited about research and you do participate. And our numbers are always just eye-popping for clinicians that we work with. And so it's wonderful. It's a huge thank you. And this allows us to really accelerate the research field.
The other, and this will be the last question on this, or comment, whatever. One of the, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, because I may well be completely wrong. One of the real weaknesses of medical research, as I see it, is what we call post-marketing. Like what happens after these drugs come on the market? They've been used a long time. Who's doing studies about what these things, so if you've taken Revlimid for 3, 4, 5 years, what does it actually do to you? And how does that compare to everybody else? Is that a good way of looking at real world data in the sense that those types of studies never occurred before, but real world data now gives us the opportunity to do those types of studies? Is that correct, or correct me in the way I should be corrected?
Well, I'll go first, and I'll just say, yes, I think you're correct in that in most research, they have to have some kind of ending date. And so they'll do a 2-year, or 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, and they'll go to that point, and then they'll stop the research, and there won't be there may not be a follow-up. Where HealthTree can come in is that we can do a longer follow-up. We can look at the patient data and look at 10 years, 15 years, and more. And like I think it was Dr. Gertz that said that, since the field is moving so fast, looking at 10 years may not be helpful because we're already on to the next drug. But there's some of us there's some patients that are still on the drug 10, 15 years down the line, and we can look at that and see what the effects are and outcomes and so forth.
I can just echo that. You are right. It's really the case. I mean, sometimes the FDA demands that they're so-called phase 4 trials. That is when the drug is on the market, that they ask the investigators, us, the academia field, to answer questions, follow up, but as you said, not that long. And it's very expensive to do such a study, and you get it not for free, but much faster and at a given time. You don't have to start collecting. You can just say, hey, if you're a patient who has Revlimid for 3 years, please answer this question. That would never happen. In other studies, you have to enroll the patient, then you have to follow up with them, and so on and so on. And in HealthTree, we have a patient who had it for 3 months, 3 years, not 30 years, but still, right? So those are definitely benefits.
And this is, this is one of the reasons we wanted to bring this up. We have entered an age where patients can help research as much or more than researchers can these days because of the data that you have. And I think HealthTree is a revolution that we don't quite yet understand how big it will be. But consider that there are research studies now that take place that take years and years and cost millions and millions and millions of dollars. And doctors have to go out and raise funds and all of that. But we offer them and say, hey, we'll give you this data for free. You figure it out. You ask the questions, and it won't cost you anything. And so even though we're doing small scale studies today, I can foresee the day in 4 or 5 years where we're going to be doing really big studies that are going to make a real impact on your lives, but we can't do it without you.